Welcome back to Primetime News and a special welcome once again to our viewers on onespotmedia.com. Up first this evening, more details were provided on what the limited reopening of school for students sitting the upcoming CSEC and CAPE exams will look like next week. Minister with Portfolio Responsibility for Education, Samuda, provided some insight in an address to the House of Representatives earlier today. Now, mention was also made about the possible return to the shift system when the new school year resumes on September 7. The Minister with Portfolio Responsibility for Education, Samuda, would begin his address to Parliament explaining the reasons for the early start of the CSEC and CAPE exams. Mr. Samuda stating, among other things, the desire by the regional examination body CXC to release results in the third week of September. Now, the Minister has faced backlash for not including all stakeholder groups in the discussions about the early convening of the exams. The National Secondary Students' Council has been particularly vocal, arguing that the Student Association has been left out of the decision-making on issues affecting its members. However, Mr. Samuda has hit back, referring to a meeting held in April, which he says was attended by that association's public relations representative.
And the National Secondary Students' Council Public Relations Officer is on record in the meeting noting that a delay in the exams would hold back students. She argued that such a decision would adversely affect students' chances of getting into university overseas for the 2020-2021 school year.
That aside, the Minister proceeded to explain what will happen when classes resume next week for students preparing for the July exams.
Our schools are now being cleaned and sanitized to facilitate the return of students to the physical classroom setting. Furniture is also being rearranged to ensure that the necessary physical distancing is maintained. Seating is being arranged 6 feet apart. For the average classroom of 24 by 24, this means there will be only 10 students and a teacher that can be accommodated in the existing facilities.
Schools reopening in September could take on a similar look with fewer students in classes, which could mean a return to the shift system.
Mr. Speaker, we have the option of purchasing space from private high schools where necessary, and representation has been made by the private high schools for assistance. And it has been received warmly because we understand the predicament of the private high schools, private schools, period. We can also step up our usage of technology, such as flipped classrooms and remote learning, or stagger the days and times that students go to school.
For the opposition spokesman on education, Peter Bunting, a return to the shift system is not the answer.
Rather, we've been moving away from the shift system. You're now talking and putting everybody back on the shift system. I don't think that is desirable. Let us use up the private institutions we have. Let us build out a proper technology infrastructure.
Concerns were also expressed in Parliament about the way forward for basic schools and private early childhood institutions, many of which are struggling to stay afloat financially.
So I'm going to have words with the Minister of Finance to see to what extent we can offer the support.
Now, meanwhile, the minister also announced how students will progress to other grades. He says where necessary, some students may be required to repeat their current grade.
Students at the early childhood, primary and secondary levels will progress to their next grade levels unhindered at the start of the 2020-2021 academic year. School administrators should rely on the assessed score records attained by the student prior to March 13th when we close schools.
A sector in shambles. That's the picture being painted by President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, JTA, with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic still impacting the education system. Owen Speed was addressing a Rotary Club of St. Andrew online meeting this afternoon.
I would agree with the JTA President Owen Speed when he stated that education is one of, if not the most important sector, but he says society has not been treating it that way for years.
We need to shape up as a people. We need to shape up as a government, and we need to shape up as leaders.
The government's decision that this year's CXA examinations will be held sooner than the JTA had suggested may be the tipping point for Mr. Speed. However, he made it clear that his grouse with how education is handled locally goes way back. He says since becoming president, he's been visiting schools across the island.
What I am seeing in many instances, poorly lit classrooms. I'm still seeing classrooms partitioned by emaciated blackboards. I'm seeing poorly ventilated classrooms and often classrooms with grimy walls, indeed, and poorly maintained or non-existent labs. These things are things that we need to spend a lot of time planning.
Despite the tragedies of COVID-19, he believes the break it has afforded the education system should be used as a reset button to fix the issues. He says the schools he attended as a child in the 1980s have not changed almost 40 years later. He also listed equipment shortages for basic functions such as printing and communication at several institutions.
This is no secret to even some of our leaders. They know. But it is full time that we do some type of an audit to ensure from the side of the Ministry of Education that we indeed know exactly what is happening in the system. We have an education officer for every school, and that information can be had easily and fed back into the ministry. But what we have is, some of our people dragging their feet and not getting the work done in good time so that we can have the necessary changes, the effective changes in our education system.
As for the current issue of CXC exams being moved forward, he still maintains that decision was made without the necessary input of local bodies such as the JTA and the National Secondary Students' Council, and he wants answers.
The National Parent Teachers Association, they were also not consulted on the matter. And there is indeed a need for explanation from our government regarding the shift of date from July 27th to July 13th, considering that COVID-19 cases are on the rise in Jamaica again. We need to get a good understanding of what caused that shift to an earlier date. And indeed, we will leave no stones unturned to get those explanations because they are very important to us.
Vashon Brown, TVJ News.